Imagine a scenario where a centralized government just decides to completely eradicate a domestic political movement.
Like a total erasure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they arrest up to 40,000 of its members. They sentence the top leadership to death in mass trials.
Right.
And, they freeze tens of millions of dollars in assets. They systematically seize the movement's entire network of hospitals, schools, charities, everything.
Which is massive.
Right. By every conventional law of political science, that movement should be dead. It should just be a footnote in history. But instead, it survives. And in some ways, its core base actually becomes more deeply entrenched.
Yeah, it completely defies our standard expectations of how political organizations operate under pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, when a state applies that level of systemic, overwhelming force, we expect the target to shatter.
Well, welcome to your custom deep dive. Today, our mission is exploring the mechanics behind that exact paradox. How does a massive social movement survive decades of extreme state repression?
It's such a fascinating question.
To unpack this, we're looking at a really deeply researched academic paper by international relations scholar Deina Abdelkader. It's titled The Survivability of Social Movements Under State Repression, the Case of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
And it is a remarkable comparative study. Abdelkader doesn't just look at a single event. She analyzes the state's attempts to wipe out the movement across two distinctly different eras.
Right, the 1950s versus the modern era.
Exactly. The initial heavy crackdowns in the 1950s, and then the incredibly severe modern landscape following the 2013 military takeover.
Now, before we really get into the mechanisms of survival, I need to offer a very clear disclaimer to you listening. We are wading into heavily politicized, highly contentious historical waters today.
Definitely.
So our goal here is absolutely not to endorse any political side, left, right, or otherwise. We are not here to validate or champion or condemn the viewpoints of the state or the groups mentioned in the text.
Right. We're keeping it strictly analytical.
Exactly. We are impartially unpacking the historical data, the sociological concepts, and, the academic arguments presented in this specific source material, just to understand the mechanics of organizational survival.
And those mechanics are highly complex. To really grasp what's happening, we're going to look at a fundamental blind spot in Western academia first.
Because that blind spot prevents us from understanding these groups.
Right. Then we'll examine the staggering empirical data comparing those two eras of crackdowns. And finally, we'll break down the specific physical and psychological frameworks the group uses to avoid extinction.
So we have to start with that analytical blind spot. I mean, why are outside observers, particularly in the West, usually so bad at predicting the resilience of these movements?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the paper points to a foundational concept called the Westphalian synthesis. This is basically the root of the disconnect.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we usually talk about the Westphalian synthesis in the context of, European history, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The Enlightenment era separation of church and state that ended the religious wars in Europe. But Abdelkader is using it here to point out a massive flaw in modern foreign policy analysis.
Precisely. Western international relations theory is built entirely on that post-Enlightenment separation. Our models just assume that religion and statecraft belong in completely separate spheres. So when Western academics or policymakers look at a group where spiritual identity and political strategy are, inextricably intertwined, our analytical models simply break down.
It's like trying to run Mac software on a Windows computer.
That's a perfect way to put it.
We just lack the fundamental operating system to process a movement where religion and politics share the exact same code.
Right. Because our models demand a secular political actor, we literally don't know what to do with a religious one. And the paper argues this bias went into absolute overdrive after the September 11th attacks.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, post 9/11, the academic and policy literature hyper-focused on viewing politically active Islamic groups almost exclusively through a securitization or terrorism paradigm.
They were viewed solely as national security threats to be neutralized.
Exactly, rather than complex sociological entities.
Which leads to essentializing them, right? I mean, if you only view a group through a security lens, you end up pigeonholing the entire movement as a monolith of irrational actors.
Yes, and the text notes this widespread tendency to view the members of these groups as just, dysfunctional individuals.
Like they're just lashing out blindly against poverty.
Right, or reacting to the cultural shock of modernization. But treating a movement that has lasted nearly a century as just a spontaneous, emotional reaction to poverty is a massive analytical failure.
So what's the alternative view?
Abdelkader argues forcefully that you must view the Muslim Brotherhood as a social movement with profound agency. We are not talking about dysfunctional outliers reacting blindly.
They're making actual choices.
Yes. The research shows these are frequently highly educated, well-adjusted members of society embroiled in complex, post-colonial struggles over meaning, identity, and values.
So they aren't just reacting to state pressure, they are actively strategizing against it.
They are making calculated choices to maintain their followers and mobilize them. In sociology, this is known as framing.
Framing.
They take external events, even devastating defeats, and meticulously recontextualize them for their base to maintain cohesion and purpose.
Wow.
If you deny them that agency in your analysis, if you just label them as irrational and waiting to be dispersed by force, you will fail to predict their resilience every single time.
But, recognizing their agency only solves half the puzzle. If they're strategic actors, they are strategizing against an adversary that has radically escalated its tactics since the 1950s.
Radically escalated, yes.
To understand how they survive, we have to look at the actual data of what they are surviving. What does state repression look like by the numbers?
The comparative data Abdelkader provides is really stark. She first looks at the era under Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, specifically from 1954 to 1960.
And just to give a little context straight from the text, this period of repression was sparked by a 1954 assassination attempt on Nasser,
Right.
which was carried out by a secret apparatus within the Brotherhood. And that triggered a massive state response, including a sweeping media smear campaign that labeled the group merchants of religion.
And the state mobilized to dismantle them. Under Nasser in the 1950s, the government announced the arrest of approximately 1,000 members.
Okay, 1,000 arrests.
And ultimately, 9 people were sentenced to death.
1,000 arrests and 9 executions is a severe decapitation strike against any organization's leadership.
Absolutely.
But when we look at the second era, the modern post-Arab Spring crackdown between 2013 and 2018, the scale of the repression shifts from targeted decapitation to an attempt at total institutional erasure.
It's night and day.
Lay out the modern data for us.
Post-2013, the estimates of detainees skyrocketed. We aren't looking at 1,000 people anymore. Human rights estimates range from 28,000 up to a staggering 41,000 individuals arrested.
41,000 arrests. Wait, that requires an entirely different level of state infrastructure just to process and hold that many people.
It does. And the death sentences follow a similar exponential curve. Remember the 9 sentences under Nasser?
Yeah.
Post-2013, in just one single mass trial involving 739 defendants, the state handed down 75 death sentences to prominent members.
In one trial.
In one trial. In that same period, the supreme guide of the movement, Mohammed Badi, along with 46 others, received life sentences.
But the state didn't stop at mass incarceration and executions. The paper details how the government went after the movement's financial and infrastructural roots.
Yes, the money and the services.
Because this wasn't just about removing political opponents from the chessboard. It was about destroying their ability to function in society at all.
The contrast in asset seizures is incredibly revealing here. Under Nasser, the state confiscated commercial businesses and printing presses worth roughly 300,000 Egyptian pounds at the time.
Which is what? Adjusted for inflation.
It's about $9 million today. A significant hit, certainly.
Right. But post-2013, the strategy evolved. The Ministry of Social Solidarity didn't just target printing presses. They systematically targeted the group's massive social infrastructure.
They dissolved hundreds of community associations.
Hundreds. And the most devastating blow was seizing the Islamic Medical Association, which alone operated 22 hospitals and 7 specialized medical centers across the country.
The sheer scale of that seizure is hard to overstate. The total value of frozen assets post-2013 is estimated at 300 million Egyptian pounds.
Wow.
Depending on the exchange rate fluctuations noted in the text, that equates to somewhere around 30 to 39 million today.
I really want to pause on the seizure of those 22 hospitals because that gets to the core of how this movement operated.
Exactly.
Providing free, high-quality medical care and education was their primary method of proving their legitimacy and value to the general public.
Right, it was their grassroots foundation.
So by seizing that infrastructure, the modern state was trying to rip out the movement's social roots, ensuring they could no longer provide tangible benefits to the Egyptian working class.
And we have to acknowledge the sheer physical violence that accompanied this structural dismantling. The paper heavily contextualizes the modern era, with the tragic events of August 2013 at Rabaa Square.
That was the protest dispersal, right?
Yes, human rights groups estimate that between 1,000 and 2,000 protesters were killed during the dispersal, a staggering toll that actually included medical staff attempting to treat the wounded on the ground.
Man. So we return to our central question. When a state arrests 40,000 people, sentences the leadership to death, seizes dozens of hospitals, freezes tens of millions of dollars, and inflicts mass casualties in the streets,
Yeah.
how does an organization physically and psychologically survive that level of systemic eradication?
Well, they rely on a highly evolved dual-layered survival playbook. Physically, they depend on two primary mechanisms: the establishment of leadership hubs in exile, and, counterintuitively, the utilization of the prison system itself.
I want to understand the mechanics of that prison survival. How do you maintain an organizational skeleton when your leadership is packed into mass cells or solitary confinement?
It's crazy, but mass incarceration actually solves a logistical problem for the movement.
Wait, really? How?
When the state rounds up thousands of members from different regions and concentrates them in a single prison complex, they inadvertently create a centralized hub.
Oh, I see.
The members recreate their hierarchy behind bars. They set up internal communication networks to smuggle messages, they establish cell block leadership, and they continue their ideological education.
So the prison literally becomes a new state-funded headquarters where the organizational skeleton is maintained.
Exactly. It happened under Nasser in the 50s, and it happens today.
And what about the members who manage to avoid the prison system?
They flee and reorganize abroad. Historically, they fled to neighboring countries like Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. But today, the geopolitical map has shifted.
Where are they going now?
The paper cites estimates that anywhere from 15,000 to 30,000 Egyptians, many with ties to the Brotherhood, have fled to Turkey.
Wow, up to 30,000.
Yeah. Others have established prominent leadership and media hubs in Qatar and the United Kingdom. This creates a secure leadership structure in exile that can continue operating entirely outside the Egyptian state's reach.
Okay, so the logistics of exile and prison networks explain how the body of the organization survives. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Logistics alone don't explain how an individual member doesn't just, break under that kind of immense psychological pressure.
Oh, they go.
There has to be an internal mechanism that processes this trauma, otherwise the movement just bleeds disillusioned members until it collapses.
And the paper identifies that exact psychological mechanism. It's a concept known as MENA.
MENA. Okay, let's break down how that actually functions in practice.
MENA translates to an adversity or persecution narrative. This is the ideological core of their resilience.
Maso.
When the state inflicts violence, seizes their hospitals, or imprisons their families, the movement does not cognitively process this as a political defeat.
Right.
Through the sociological process of framing we discussed earlier, they recontextualize that trauma as a divine test.
So it's a self-fulfilling psychological loop. The state thinks applying extreme repression will destroy the movement's morale.
Yes.
But the movement's ideology is explicitly designed to consume that repression as fuel. It's like a biological stressor, like a muscle tearing during a workout, only to build back denser. Or, the idea that the hottest fire forges the hardest steel.
Fuel is exactly the right way to think about it. The paper actually includes accounts from members who explain that regime repression acts as empirical proof to the base that they are on the right path.
Because if the state is fighting them,
Right? The internal logic dictates that if a corrupt, secular state hates them this much and is willing to go to these extreme violent lengths to silence them, then the movement must be doing God's work.
that's wild. The suffering itself validates the mission. It is the ultimate source of internal solidarity.
Yes, repression is the actual glue holding them together.
But, recognizing their agency means we also have to recognize they aren't immune to internal failure. Trauma, as a cohesive glue, must have a breaking point.
It does.
When the scale of the modern crackdown is this unprecedented, when you jump from 1,000 arrests to 41,000, does MENA still work universally across the entire movement? Are we seeing cracks forming today that didn't exist in the 1950s?
This raises an important question. We are seeing massive internal fractures, and this is the most critical modern finding in Abdelkader's research.
What kind of fractures?
The data shows that the glue of MENA is actively failing, specifically along generational lines. And these modern fractures look completely different from the historical schisms the group used to face.
Let's contextualize that shift. Historically, the divisions within the Brotherhood were mostly about organizational tactics, right? The paper details the long-standing debate between the doves and the hawks.
Correct. The historical divide was ideological. The doves were the reformists.
Right, the ones who wanted to participate in politics.
Exactly. They believed the movement should participate in formal politics, build alliances, and run for office. In fact, in the mid-1990s, this ideological split was so pronounced that mid-ranking reformists actually broke away to form the Al-Wasat Party.
Because they specifically wanted to operate within a democratic pluralistic system,
Yeah.
and the hawks are on the other end of that spectrum.
Right. The hawks were the conservatives. They deeply distrusted the political system. They argued the movement should avoid formal politics entirely and focus strictly on traditional social services, religious education, and just maintaining survival.
It's a classic debate between progressives wanting to integrate into the system and traditionalists wanting to build an alternative to it.
But the modern fracture isn't a debate over how to participate in politics.
What is it then?
It's a complete, visceral rejection of politics altogether. The modern crack is generational, pitting the youth against the elders, and it is severe.
Wow.
After the massive 2011 uprisings, the youth within the movement were the ones on the front lines in the streets. They spilled their blood for the revolution.
And then they saw the movement briefly hold national power.
Yes. And then they watched the older leadership totally mismanage that moment, leading directly to the utterly devastating 2013 crackdown.
So the youth are carrying the trauma of the Reb massacre and the mass arrests, and they are directing their fury inward at their own leadership, not just at the state.
They absolutely blame the older leadership for the movement's failure and its shattered public image. Driven by despair and the sheer unmitigated trauma of the recent crackdowns, the youth have completely lost faith in the older generation's playbook.
The patient, social service-oriented playbook.
Exactly. They view formal political participation as a deadly waste of time.
Okay, if they reject the traditional social work and they refuse to participate in formal politics, what is the actual strategy of the youth on the ground today?
Agitation and disruption. They want to maintain a constant revolutionary posture against the state.
How do they organize that?
The paper notes they organize weekly protests, utilizing small traditional study groups known as USRA.
USRA?
Yeah. Historically, USRA was a family unit for religious study, but the youth have repurposed these small cells to constantly agitate the regime in any way possible. They are operating in pure survival and resistance mode.
While the youth are on the ground protesting in these USRA cells, where is the older generation?
Well, the elders men, mostly in their 60s and 70s, are largely the ones who managed to flee into exile in places like Turkey and London.
Ah.
And from abroad, they still maintain a tight, almost cult of personality grip on the official leadership titles and, most importantly, the organization's finances.
Oh, wow. The financial disparity alone seems like a recipe for an organizational implosion.
The resentment is palpable. The paper cites sources noting this exact tension. You have youth members inside Egypt expected to survive and maintain the resistance on a stipend equivalent to about $30 a month from the organization.
$30 a month, while facing constant threat of arrest.
Exactly. Meanwhile, there are widespread allegations of exiled leaders utilizing organization funds to buy real estate and cars for their children in Turkey.
There's a profound, almost tragic irony in how the state's tactics have backfired here.
How so?
Since 2013, the state's strategy has been to utterly crush the group to eliminate them as a political threat. But by destroying all the political avenues, executing the moderates, and physically seizing the hospitals.
Right.
The state has entirely discredited the older generation's peaceful, nonviolent playbook.
That is the exact paradox of state repression that the research highlights. When a state systematically eliminates all avenues for nonviolent political participation and social work, it fundamentally alters the DNA of the targeted movement.
The old debates just don't matter.
Right. The old ideological debate between reformists and conservatives doesn't matter anymore because the youth have decided the old rules are completely obsolete.
The state's attempt to crush the group hasn't eliminated the threat. It has effectively radicalized a younger generation away from peaceful methods.
Yes.
They've created a cohort of youth who believe the only viable path forward is relentless, disruptive agitation.
Which brings us to the broader implications. I mean, if you are a policymaker, an international relations student, or simply someone trying to comprehend the daily realities of the Middle East, understanding the survivability of this specific group is absolutely essential.
Let's connect this to the bigger regional picture for the listener. Why does the survival of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt matter to the rest of the world?
because they're arguably the strongest, most resilient opposition social movement in the entire Middle East. They possess a level of deep, grassroots populism that terrifies age-old authoritarian regimes across the region.
Especially in places like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Exactly. Remember the data. Before the crackdown, during the brief window of free elections in 2012, they won 52% of the vote. They mathematically proved they could mobilize a majority of the population.
Right. You simply cannot properly analyze foreign policy, regional stability, or the potential for future democratic movements in the Muslim world if you are running that outdated Mac on Windows operating system.
You really can't.
If you insist on viewing these groups as irrational actors waiting to be scattered by force, you will be caught completely off guard when they leverage their own suffering to rebuild from the rubble.
The standard formulas of Western political science simply do not apply to an organization whose very identity, logistics, and psychology are actively forged in the fire of state repression.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling thought to end on.
Yeah.
We've seen that historically extreme state repression, that narrative of MENA, serves as the psychological glue that binds this movement together. It gives them divine purpose.
It does.
But at the exact same time, the sheer unprecedented extremity of the modern post-2013 crackdown has deeply alienated the younger generation, completely destroying their faith in patient, peaceful political compromise.
Right.
So here is something for you to ponder on your own as we sign off. If the older generation, with their historical focus on social services and formal politics, eventually ages out and passes away in comfortable exile, what happens to the stability of the entire region when the only people left to lead this massive, deeply entrenched movement are the youth? A generation whose entire worldview, psychology, and strategic playbook was forged in the absolute uncompromising violence of the post-2013 crackdowns. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.